Greetings, I'm Shad, and if you're familiar with me or my YouTube channel, you might notice that there's something different about me. Well, you are right. I'm not wearing my glasses. That's better, everything's back to normal. Alright, the Gambeson. A Gambeson, also known as an Aketon, and it has a few other names as well, and that is because it has had such a wide use throughout history, is a type of body protection, also known as armor, and was quite popular throughout the medieval period. The garment, or piece of armor, is composed out of layers of linen. Indeed, some have called Gambeson padded armor. And so if you are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games where it has padded armor on the list, well, that's what it is. Gambeson is padded armor. But it is far better than many role-playing games show or describe. And its effectiveness comes down to how truly thick it is. A proper Gambeson is actually a very thick, and for the type of armor it is, heavy garment. Now, the thicknesses could vary, and sometimes it comprised out of just layers and layers of cotton. Other times it would have an inside and outside layer of cotton with wool sewn in between. And I mentioned that Gambeson is far more effective than many role-playing games and other things kind of propose or put forward in their rules and things like that. But just how effective is it? Well, there are a couple of circumstances that can determine the protective level that a Gambeson will give. One, what type of weapon is you're being attacked by? If it's a particularly thick Gambeson, it is very effective in protecting you against blunt style weapons. It's not going to save you all the time. You can, of course, get cracked ribs and broken bones, but by having such a padded layer of protection, you can really understand that a Gambeson is very effective against blunt type weapons. Alright then, what about swords and piercing kind of weapons? So we're talking about arrows, spears of the like, and stuff like that. How good is it against that? Well, actually, quite effective. Again, it'll come down to how thick the Gambeson is, but also what will really determine it as well is how sharp the weapon is that you're getting attacked by. And this is actually a very important thing to understand, because many people will say that a sword can chop through padded armor Gambeson all the time. That's actually not really true. Like I said, it depends on how sharp the sword is, because cotton and linen type of materials can actually be very effective in stopping cuts, especially if the knife or sword isn't fully sharpened. I'm talking like razor sharp levels of sharpness. Even if it's just like chisel sharp instead of razor sharp, and indeed even if the blade is actually a little dull, you won't be getting through that material. And with the Gambesons, because they have so many layers, I mean, my goodness, they can actually save your life in a lot of circumstances. The good old Mike Loads actually did a test in pitting a longbow shot, so arrow from a longbow to an authentic Gambeson. Now granted, it's a particularly thick Gambeson, but they did come in that thickness, but we also have to understand sometimes they weren't as thick as well. There was variance in them. But in the type of Gambeson that they're testing in this video, it stops the longbow arrow. That's crazy! And so it actually doesn't really make sense to put Gambeson padded armor on the lowest level of protection on the armor scales. No, actually, it's pretty darn good. Indeed, it seems to be the forgotten armor. Now, it's not forgotten for medieval enthusiasts like myself, but for Hollywood, movies, video games, tabletop pen and paper role-playing games, it really does seem to be forgotten, or at the very least, underestimated and misunderstood in how effective it was, and also how prominent it was as well. So let us try and fix this horrible travesty! And the first step is by you accepting the correct information if you don't already know so, which you probably already do know, and I'm just preaching to the choir. But remember, Gambeson, very effective. It's effective against cuts, it's effective against piercing, arrows, and it's also effective against blunt weapons. It's far more effective than people think. It is not impregnable, okay? Of course you can cut through it, and again, one of the main things that will really help in cutting through such thick material is the sharpness of the weapon. That really is going to play an important role in getting through this armor. Now, a couple of other facts about the glorious Gambeson. For one, the gambeson was often used by itself, but also in conjunction with other types of armor. It was one of the main garments that people would wear underneath mail. Chainmail, but also plate as well. And indeed, as an extension of that, it also became a fashionable garment that people would wear in their everyday lives, because many knights were going around wearing gambesons as part of their armor, and because knights were very noble and had a high status in society, well, people wanted to reflect that in their daily life. And so guess what? They started to wear gambesons just because they wanted to say, well, I'm a knight too. And in all honesty, they look pretty cool as well. Seriously, we got to bring the gambeson back into mainstream fashion. The first step is to go shopping in it. All right, next time I go down to the supermarket, guess what I'm wearing? All right, some observations from having worn a gambeson. Okay, freedom of movement, very much so. Having said that, you do certainly realize and know that you're wearing it. It's very similar to wearing a really thick snow jacket. If you've ever worn a really thick snow jacket and you're going snowboarding and stuff like that, very similar. But the more I move around in it, the more comfortable and confident I feel in swinging my arms around. Better do that with the foam sword. Now, this gambeson in particular actually weighs about 3 kilos, which is decently heavy, and in terms of the types of gambesons that are available on the market, this is one of the thicker and heavier ones, but I barely feel it. And one of the main reasons is probably because of the belt. The gambeson is so stiff that a lot of this area is supporting the upper area, and the belt is holding up all of this, and so, you know, I barely feel it at all. And boy, you really underestimate the thickness of this stuff until you actually grab one and you're like, whoa, I was like this. I was like, whoa, this is way more thick than I originally envisioned. I can really see how this thing can stop blades and arrows. Something that has to be mentioned in regards to the gambeson is how hot it can get. Now, I'm in Australia, it's summertime. Granted, it's at night, but even it being cooler in the nighttime, I'm sweating up a storm in this thing. I could put up with it, especially, you know, if my life was on the line. I'd just, you know, deal with it. I'd sweat a bit. That's life. There you go. But it does need to be said, all these extra layers and thicknesses creates a very strong insulation. And it's just like, but if you're in like England, which is a much colder climate, you know, this would be perfect, especially in the winter time. You know, this is the thing you'd want. You know, it would keep you snug as a bug in a rug, because it, you know, it kind of is a rug. You're just wearing it. Now, I mentioned that gambeson seems to be the forgotten piece of armor in movies and video games and role-playing games and such. And the type of armor that seems to be the go-to thing in terms of the light, flexible, and also affordable piece of armor seems to be leather. And of course, you've got, you know, padded leather, studded leather, hardened leather. I don't really know why that has become the case, but it really is. I mean, you know, you go on and you'll watch TV shows and everything, you'll generally see Vikings in biker-style studded leather armor and stuff like that. And that annoys me because the leather armor seems to have replaced the gambeson. And the gambeson really is the business, okay? When you're talking about the entry set of armor that you would pick when you're going into a battlefield, you would pick the gambeson. And this is a good question, okay? Because if you are about to become a soldier and you're going to go onto a battlefield, you have a choice. Would you pick gambeson or would you pick leather armor? And this raises another question. Is leather armor even an actual thing? Is it real? Well, there is actually a bit of debate on this subject, and it really kind of depends on what level of leather armor you're really talking about, because there are proper historical cases of authentic leather armor having existed in history. Lamella armor is a perfect example. Thick leather, rawhide, or buff leather that was used in lamella armor. And there are also some historical cases of kind of joint pieces having been made out of leather. But then it kind of stops, all right? When you hit the medieval period, there aren't many historical examples of authentic leather armor. Now, of course, that can come down to the fact that it's leather, it's organic, and it breaks down, it doesn't survive time very well. But we're also talking about historical artworks and things like that. The leather armor armor is not really featured a lot. You see Gambesons, but you don't really see the leather armor thing. Just as a small caveat as well, okay, leather was used to an extent in combination with other armors, like brigandine, but it wasn't actually the leather being used as the armor. It was just holding together the metal plates that was underneath it. And this is really where the whole misconception of studded leather comes from, because the metal was held onto the leather with studs, and on the outside looks like leather and studs, therefore studded leather. No, it's actually not really studded leather. Brigandine. Look it up. From my own observation and research, the next point where leather armor really kind of becomes a big thing, the buff coats. Now, these were basically thick, rawhide coats. And funny, they were cut in a style very similar to a gambeson. Interesting thought there. But they appeared in the late Renaissance period. They came around when firearms are around. So before then, in the actual medieval period, was leather armor actually a thing? I haven't found many cases documenting authentic leather armor being used in the medieval period. So, to help us kind of figure out this question of Gambeson versus leather armor, let's do a very simple thought experiment. First of all, in the medieval period, the most common and most effective type of armor was used was mail. It actually wasn't full plate. Full plate is more of a Renaissance thing. When you get to the full decked out, full plate armor head to toe, well, that's actually just after the late medieval period. More in the Renaissance period, you get that full level. Of course, you do get plated segments before then that was interwoven into the mail, but really mail was the business of its day. And any soldier worth his salt is going to want to get mail armor. That's what you want. If you want if you want the best chance of surviving on a battlefield, you want to be wearing mail. But not everyone could afford mail. So then you go with the cheaper alternative, and this is when the person would be thinking of, okay, well, I have a decision. I can choose Gambeson, or I could choose leather. Well, a very interesting fact comes into this question, and that is when this soldier eventually gets his mail, he's going to need a Gambeson anyway, because you don't wear mail on your skin. You always need a padded type of undergarment to stop the chafing and the discomfort and everything like that. And so pure logic would say that the soldiers would always pick a Gambeson as their entry-level piece of armor, because it's the first step in getting the better armor, the mail. And indeed, Gambeson was also worn under plate as well. And so even if you're in the time period of where plate was around, you would still want to get a Gambeson first. And in my mind, this simple little thought experiment actually reveals quite a bit of, intriguing truth in regards to this question of Gambeson versus leather armor. To the point that, in my opinion, I'm thinking that it was barely ever used in the medieval period. Talking about the leather armor being, the boiled leather armor, barely ever used. Gambeson, or the Aketon, is the thing that they would wear. Because honestly, if you had the choice between a Gambeson or a piece of leather armor, you would always pick the Gambeson for the reasons that we just went through. So then why is it so prominent in movies and video games? I have no idea, but anyone who is watching this, please change your thinking. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later. The Queen Wave. The Queen Wave. Sweating up a storm. Wonder if you can see it on camera. Squirrel! There's nothing. I tell you what, I feel really authentic in this thing. I mean, not only is it the right thickness, and you can really tell and feel that you're wearing a piece of armor, but I also reckon I have the right girth of a medieval nobleman. Peasant, go get me my food. Yeah, alright, I think that went really well. I'm gonna go eat some food. I just like saying it like that. Food. Eat some food. Some chicken and some food.